back to Miniature Mashup. I'm sure you're wondering where I've been. Well, I did end up getting that gastric bypass surgery I've been talking about for so long. So if you had some role in helping me fund that, thank you so much. We finally got there. Of course, now my stomach has all these little pink scars on it. It looks a little bit like a lump of cottage cheese with a raspberry drizzle on it. Otherwise, surgery went fine. No real complications, except that it turns out I do have 4 stomachs, and 2 of them are just some kind of gravy bladder. Something weird did happen once I got back from my operation, and I'm not sure I want to talk about it here. I began physical therapy about 2 days after I got out of the hospital. They told us it would promote blood flow and therefore healing. Halfway into the walk, I thought to myself, maybe I'll just take the shortcut home just to play it safe. No need to be a tough guy. Someone had just been playing musical chairs with my intestines. As soon as I had this thought and I began to head that way, I saw 2 squad cars with their lights strobing. I still had my headphones on, and I was like chuckling along with a podcast, and I hear this weird sound effect, like a 1950s flying saucer movie thing. It was like, wow, wow, wow. But it wasn't a sound effect. It was actually like a woman on the street, and she was screaming for her life. And it's just like these full-lunged screams. I've seen people in pain like that before, and it just seems so out of place in that beautiful afternoon.
D&D is morally deficient.
Dungeons and Dragons.
It's spiritually corrupt. It is educationally evil. It teaches evil, and it is potentially dangerous.
Mazes and monsters, far out gates.
Now I am making your silver pants blue.
Freakz is the latest post-apocalyptic skirmish game from Osprey Press. It wasn't that long ago I did a raving review about The Dune by Chris McDowell, and now we have Freakz by Michael Whelan. And I don't want to make this review about comparing the 2 systems because ultimately it doesn't really matter. They're both miniatures agnostic and affordable, so there's no reason not to get both, like I have. Although they sent them to me for free, but I still would buy them. To sum it up quickly, The Doomed is more like a class-based system where 4 different factions have different soldier types and varying degrees of rankings and quality, whereas Freakz is more like a skill-based system where the units are all kind of the same. You get 1 leader and several grunts, but they begin to differ as they acquire different mutations, which gives them different powers. Otherwise, the games do share some common elements, and all of those elements are pretty good. The premise of Freakz could not be more tailored to my tastes. Post-apocalyptic settings are my favorite, which is great because pretty soon we'll all be living in one. It's also a skirmish game with a well-developed campaign system, literally my favorite type of game. There are dark gods, cults, superpowers, all the stuff I've loved since childhood. In fact, in many ways, this game is like an adult version of playing with He-Man and Ninja Turtles on your kitchen table. You've got these squads of freakish monster men who blast and stab each other while the fate of the world hangs in the balance.
Pull out your bone china and polish my gravy boat. It's time to set the table.
Humanity is sort of struggling to rebuild civilization. They're farming mealworms and they're growing turnips in their own. You control a squad of scavengers searching for prizes among the ruins of great cities. At some point, your squad came into contact with crystalline artifacts which mutated them horrifically. Think of it like the devil fruits from One Piece, but without all of the screaming and overeating. These artifacts are gifts from the atomic gods that hail from the void, a dimension that mankind tore a hole into during the Great War. All those nuclear explosions opened up a portal to their dimension. Bonding with these gifts means entering into the service of these gods. In this game, you do play as the bad guys, or at least people who are desperate enough to make dark pacts in a time of great need. If any of that rings familiar, it's because Freakz has many parallels with the Warhammer 40k universe's Chaos Gods, and they've got their devoted mutant cultists who could receive too many of the gods' blessings and become wildly mutated and mindless monsters. Even the individual gods themselves are analogous to specific Chaos Gods. You've got Myconith, the mushroom god. He's very clearly an analog to Nurgle. Bloats his followers with fungal infections that spread and make them harder to kill. Sanguis is the vampire god who can mind control and debuff enemies like Slaanesh. Portcullis, whose gifts allow you to warp space. It's kind of the closest thing to magic in this setting. It makes him the most like Tzeentch, and he's also the most Lovecraftian of the 4. And lastly is Yaul, the god of beasts. He's like Korn. He revels in hand-to-hand combat. He sends his followers across the board, like waving their melee weapons and screaming all the way. I don't know if that woman ever stopped screaming. I heard her screaming all the way as I walked across 3 long blocks. And I was not moving quickly. I was sort of trundling along the way an obese middle-aged guy after surgery does. I assume she stopped screaming at some point. Of course, I don't think she's like some Lovecraftian narrator in an asylum just screaming out the rest of her days. I mean, I don't know that for certain. I mean, people do really end up that way sometimes.
Drop it in the slot and grab your joysticks. It's time to talk about gameplay.
The game calls itself a beer and pretzels game, but that implies a shallowness to the rule set that isn't really there. It's easy to learn, but there's a lot here in terms of strategy, and your choices on the tabletop and in the campaign matter a lot. That being said, the basics of the game are elegant and designed in a way that makes them very easy to grasp. There are just 3 kinds of firearms, and their range and attack power are staggered. The shotgun only shoots 6 inches but does 3 dice damage, while the rifle does 1 damage but can hit anything on the board. There are just 3 kinds of units: leaders and grunts, who are controlled by the players, and AI-controlled monsters. Leaders have 3 health and can make 3 actions per turn. Grunts have 2 actions per turn and 2 health. There are only 3 kinds of actions: move, interact, and attack. 3 guns, 3 unit types, and 3 types of actions. It might not seem like a lot, but within those combinations lies a lot of depth, especially when you start factoring in the superpowers. Playing with my partner Sidra, we each had a form of board control. My leader could spawn landmines. If someone ended a move or began a move within 2 inches of them, they'd explode. And Sidra had a death ray, but it took a round to charge up, meaning I couldn't end my turn within line of sight of that character. If I had any of my miniatures out there, next turn, that character went, she would just nuke them. The superpowers really add a lot of depth to gameplay and are quite correctly the focus of the game. Not just on the tabletop, but also in the campaign as well. I'll get to that in a bit. There's a lot of interplay between the powers. Some powers are like hard counters to other powers, and then also there's a lot of synergy between powers, certain powers, and they combine well together. It's a good idea to be somewhat familiar with the basic parameters of your opponent's powers as well, and it's not hard to do that because they are well explained in just a few lines. This game feels like the perfect combination of Necromunda and HeroClix, really taking the strengths of both. The feel and flow of combat is fast-paced, as the game doesn't involve as much measuring as most war games. Attacks resolve with only 2 dice rolls. You'll need a few tokens. It's a great game for newcomers, but there's plenty also for veterans like myself to do. I mean, I really couldn't do anything. And to help that woman, I mean? Except get yelled at or shot at by cops. I mean, I was still dopey from my prescribed painkillers and extreme dieting. But if I'm honest, that's not why I turned away from that scene with the police. I didn't want to be near the sound of someone who was at the end of things. It was too much for me. I was literally just taking the first steps towards a new beginning in my life, and I pitied this woman. I was afraid my empathy would bring me right back into the hopelessness I had just recently escaped. You know, this feeling of wellness I have now is newborn, and newborns can be fragile.
Time to kiss hands and shake babies. You're on the campaign now.
The campaign system, while not as intricate as something like Necromunda or Mordheim, is substantial with some fun and novel concepts. Experience is earned in the way typical of these types of games, and it's used to upgrade your warband between fights. They can let you add more squad members, buy artifacts, make your leader harder to kill. You can use it to align yourself with a particular god. Aligning yourself with a particular god allows you to exchange found artifacts for artifacts of that god, and that lets you tailor your artifacts to your chosen playstyle. When a squad member has reached their maximum number of artifacts, you can sacrifice that squad member to your god. This allows that god greater influence in the world, and that means that there's a game-wide rule shift, giving an advantage to players who use that god's artifacts. But the majority of these effects aren't particularly powerful, especially in the beginning of the game, so a player has to decide if it's worth losing a maxed out character for a marginal beneficial effect. Long-term strategic choices like this are what make a campaign system great, and they're lacking in most skirmish games today. You must sacrifice members of your warband if you're going to win the game. That's the only way to trigger the final battle and bring your god into the world. If your squad succeeds, they live on as immortal champions as their god shapes the world in his image. Keeping a maxed out character around, though, is risky, as bonding with more artifacts than they can handle can turn units into misshapen monstrosities. Very much like 40k's Chaos Spawn. These monsters attack anyone near them, and they'll eat the artifacts inside these guys that they kill, which makes them even stronger. And if you don't kill them at the end of the scenario, there's a chance that they'll return in the future. So this is really refreshing, as too many skirmish games are really just a series of leveling up, getting XP, and battles. In this game, long-term consequences can result from just one bad day. It wasn't a bad day when I heard that woman screaming. It was sunny, like 63 degrees out. Every grandma was out walking their French bulldogs, and her pain just seemed like a ragged scar on the face of this beautiful day. It happened in the nicest part of town, too. It was just a block from the farmer's market. If it had happened an hour earlier, women trading scented candles for eggplants would have heard her screams. And, I don't feel bad for myself for hearing this. Like, I'm not the main character in this woman's pain. But it has haunted me since it happened. The other day, I walked past a construction site, and there was like a machine there, and it was making a wailing sound. And I was taken right back there when I was with that woman again.
Is that a charcoal pencil in your pocket, or are you just happy to see me? Let's talk about art design.
Freakz doesn't have the look of a typical Osprey publication. The cover has deformed cartoon characters piled on one another, and the high contrast of blue and yellow. It evokes the old Madballs packaging, and if you like gross-out toys of the 90s, you're in luck. That's the only kind of art you get in this book. No photographs of actual play. The color choices throughout the book are hard to look at, not just figuratively. I do think they're ugly, but it's also hard to read in places. Sometimes you get blue text on a blue background. Note to the author, the people who buy these third-party skirmish games, we're old. Look at the channels that review this stuff. We all have white in our whiskers. Our eyes don't work that good. You can get Freakz in a PDF form for only $21, which is a pretty good deal, but be prepared to print this thing out in color, because black and white, it just doesn't lend itself with this format. And also, if you're going to do that, get ready to drain all the blue ink out of your cartridge. Illustrations are by the cartoonist Bone Dust. I put a link to their Instagram down in the doodly goo. They're talented if you like cartoon illustrations. There's a lot to enjoy there. I just don't like it in the context of war games. I like realism, right? Because war games is about simulating realism. I like realism in my terrain, my miniatures, my rule sets, and this sort of Ed Roth, Rat Finks cartoons, they'd really kind of do the opposite of that. I can understand not wanting to bite on 40k style the way so many other science fiction games do, and the game markets itself as a game of cartoon violence, so maybe that's why they went in that direction. But it's not a game of cartoon violence. Like, cartoon violence is when Daffy Duck gets shot with a shotgun and his beak flips around to the other side of his head. This game has ritual sacrifice, dying from sniper fire, and drinking the blood of corpses. That's not what cartoon violence is. Now, obviously, everything I just said here is very subjective. You may love the art style and the zaniness. Neither is much of a black mark against the game, in my opinion. I only mention it because I'm trying to give you a full review, and that includes talking about the presentation and where I think things could be better. I wish I thought of a way to make things better for that screaming woman. I guess there was one. She could have just hit that like and that subscribe button, hit the bell, or left me a comment. She could have told me what her favorite skirmish game is. Okay, I turned this into a bit, but that really did happen last Monday.
Is my top too low? I think my quibbles are showing.
WYSIWYG, or what you see is what you get, is impossible in this game. You just can't represent all of the mutational combinationals on a miniature. Like this Formori miniature I have has multiple limbs, so he works for a squad member with extra limbs mutation. But once he picks up the wing mutation, what am I supposed to do? Break out the green stuff and the Dremel tool while my opponent takes the rest of his turn? Are we to magnetize every limb and head of every miniature that we're going to use in this game? That's ridiculous. Players simply have to remember who has what powers and what gear, regardless of what a model looks like. And that's fine. When I came up and started miniatures gaming, WYSIWYG was largely a luxury. Best system I have for this game is for guys without powers. I just use sort of post-apocalyptic survivor miniatures like this Charleston Heston guy over here. And once they get a mutation, I use one of my gun-toting weirdos. And with luck, the mutation on the model looks like something the character actually has, but you can't make that always happen. I just wish the game would have embraced that approach. Regular post-apocalyptic soldiers fighting alongside lumpy, misshapen mutant men, with the idea being that any of the sort of tumors growing on these guys could manifest any number of powers, like a big old tumor on the back could sprout wings, extra limbs, or fire spores out of it. Instead, they leaned very heavily into these sort of standees at the back of the book. There's 12 pages set aside in the back of the book for 14 different standees. They're also the only art throughout the book. But the problem is, if there were 44 standees at the back of the book, that still wouldn't address this issue. In order to represent all of the different mutation combinations with the 3 different weapons, you would need 70,000 standees. That is a lot of dead trees. I suppose if your cartoon standee does get a new mutation, you can sort of draw it on there if you don't mind slowing the game down to pick up a miniature and put it back. So if you have some kind of artistic ability, even that seems like a kind of a silly solution, right? I like the 3 types of guns that are available. It's fun to put riflemen up in a tower or run up on somebody with a shotgun, but the lack of pistols in this game seems like a real blind spot to me, because so many post-apocalyptic miniatures are wielding pistols. Stat-wise, they could have been as short range as shotguns, just do less damage, and then to balance it out, they could give you an extra die of damage in close combat, because, pistols are still dangerous up close. And to rub salt in the wound, there's even a picture of a standee in the back, one of only 14, who's wielding a pistol. I thought they were all destroyed in the Great War game. What happened? I guess this guy might have been a tacky grandma before he mutated, and that pistol is just a cigarette lighter or something. There's no nice way to parse this, so I'll come out and say it. There's some language in this book that I find irritating and strange. For some reason, the only melee weapon in the game is a knife. Why only knives, when so many post-apocalyptic miniatures wield other weapons? In fact, very few are holding knives, because they're kind of hard to do in 28mm scale. They don't really look very impressive. None of the standees are depicted holding knives. They don't even have knives in sheaths like anywhere on their body. There is a standee with a bat and an ice pick, though. There's even a picture of 2 freaks fighting in hand-to-hand combat. One of them has a sledgehammer, the other one has a stoplight, neither of which will be much help when making a sandwich. It's a real bummer when the art and the text contradict one another. Why not just call the melee weapons, I don't know, melee weapons, or close combat weapons, or hand-to-hand weapons? I don't get this decision to just commit to knives like that. The power-ups you fight to obtain throughout the game are called artifacts. Artifact literally means an object that's crafted by men. Now, the crystals are dropped from the void and they morph into symbiotes. They weren't crafted by men. Men had nothing to do with them, and they weren't even crafted. They were just sort of formed by the gods. So 0 for 2 on that, I guess. Michael Whelan, the author, has made other games, and whimsy is clearly a part of his brand, but the concept and gameplay of this game fall under the grimdark banner, and the sort of wackiness that's there really feels shoehorned in. All of the names of mutations in this game replace the letter S with the letter Z. I guess they don't have the Sheetz or Zaxby's restaurant franchises in the UK, because that's what they do on their menus here. But what's cute in the context of overpriced chicken nuggets is silly and irritating when applied to animating corpses. So a power where you blast a skunk-like musk at an opponent isn't called scent spray, it's called Zakent Zapray. All of the names with the letter S in them are like that, and they all... I would feel like a schmuck using these terms, so I just ignore this aspect of the game. Instead, I pronounce the S's like a person who isn't succumbing to a narcotic coma. It's forced, it's tacked on, and the game would have been stronger without it. That's not even the only problem with the names of mutations. Many are too wordy and too vague. If this really is a beer and pretzels game the way it's been marketed, then the name should reflect what the abilities actually do. There's a power called Human Ventriloquist, wherein you can move one of your opponents around on the board. The thing is, though, a ventriloquist puppet never moves further than a ventriloquist's arm can reach, so I don't know, maybe call it human marionette. That's kind of the word I think you were going for there. There's a thing called Gash Gusher, which maybe that means you spray poisonous gas out of your gash. Don't spray your poisonous gas at anybody. Poisonous gas at an opponent. But actually it just works like a smoke grenade. And I'd call it smoke grenade or human smoke grenade. Remember the rule of KISS? Keep it simple, stupid? There's a power that makes you immune to explosions. Is it called explosion proof? Nope, it's called pestilent putrescence. It's called pustulant putrescence. Not only is that very hard to say, apparently, it's also a second thing you have to say. You always have to say two things when one would have sufficed. This guy's immune to explosions. Or, this guy's got pustulant putrescence. Well, what does that mean? It means he's immune to explosions. Don't need all that. If you had called it explosion proof or explosion immunity, you could have cut right through that. Now, this doesn't apply to every power, but there's a lot of powers with this kind of thing going on. Flesh Mines works on corpses. Why not call it Corpse Mines? Power Weird Walker doesn't involve walking. You swap locations with another unit. Why not call it Location Swapper or Location Swap? It would just make it so much easier to remember who has what powers and what they do if the names were just a little plainer. And here's an unnecessary term. The 2 XP points you get at the end of a scenario if you don't complete any objectives is called Sympathy XP. I don't know, why not just call it XP? Why draw attention to the fact that your opponent might feel really bad about kicking your ass? Seems a little condescending to me. For me, these affectations, though minor, keep Freakz from being a perfect game. I suppose nothing really is perfect in this world. Sometimes, what could seem like a perfect Overall, I give Freakz a very positive 9 butt ugly mutants out of 10. Evolve into the harrowing experience of listening to a human being howl like an
A
ant.
great way to support this channel is to head on over to our eBay store and take advantage of the dirt cheap miniatures, role-playing games, graphic novels, and action figures offered there. Or why not check out our Facebook group and meet some of the wonderful mashed potatoes who support this channel. And, as always, thanks for watching.